What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Rough Drafts, where I go deep each week on specific topics in the current limited format. My name is Sam Pratt. The current limited format is now Edge of Eternities, and today I'm going to be talking about Gene Pollinator. Gene Pollinator is a common 1-mana 1/2 in green that has tap an untapped permanent you control, add 1 mana of any color. If you've been playing Limited for the past half decade, this immediately calls to mind a couple of my favorite cards over the years. Those cards are Jaspera Sentinel from Kaldheim, which was a common green 1-mana 1/2 with reach. Tap an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. And Sentinel Stalwart from Brothers War, which was a common 1-mana 1/1 that you could tap an untapped artifact or creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. These two previous iterations of this type of card were each very strong, and each did quite unique things in their respective limited formats. I was a huge fan of each of them. I talked about that last week in the preview episode. Today, I'm going to spend some time talking about exactly what made those cards special, what that means for Gene Pollinator, and what kind of things Gene can get up to in EOE. So what was good about these cards? Jaspera Sentinel in Kaldheim. This is the one that's a 1/2 reach. You have to tap a creature you control. That's the most restrictive tap cost of any of these. Stalwart and Gene can each tap non-creature permanents. But in Kaldheim, the body and the type on Jaspera Sentinel were extremely relevant. I didn't mention this is an elf. There were elf themes in Kaldheim. 1/2 is great. It having reach was really relevant. Kaldheim had a really strong equipment theme, had a lot of equipment running around. So having your mana engine also be able to be a body that could block flyers, it could wear equipment and attack in, etc. Those were all very important parts of this card. And the rainbow mana was very good because Kaldheim was a very splashy format. Kaldheim had the dual snow lands to help you splash, and a big part of that format, especially in the green decks, was there was this cycle of uncommon utility lands. So you were often using Jaspera Sentinel to kind of splash these off-color utility lands. That was a very powerful way to get more utility out of your mana base. So on Sentinel, it's the worst at producing mana, but it was the best body, and the body was very relevant. Sentinel Stalwart had a much less relevant body. It was just a 1/1. Its types didn't matter. You would occasionally play decks where sacrificing it mattered, but Stalwart was the most pure mana engine of the three. Brothers War was a very unique format. It's kind of like the rectangles format. It was the format where Lords of Limited coined the term rectangles just for game objects. Stalwart could tap artifacts, so there were so many game objects in Brothers War that tapping other things was so trivial if you built your deck right, that this really ended up being Birds of Paradise adjacent, I think more so than Jaspera Sentinel. And also splashing in Brothers War approached being free. There was a huge presence of colorless artifacts in this set, especially in these creatures that were colorless up front and had off-color unearth costs. So there was like a 4-mana 3/1 that came with a 1/1 that you could unearth for white mana. It was like one of the best commons in the set. A lot of the unearthed cards were extremely good. So one of the very unique things about Brothers War was that if you were hip to how good the colorless cards were, you could build these decks where you had like 9-10 colorless spells and really get splashy and ambitious with your mana base. And Sentinel Stalwart was one of the best ways to do that. So that format was a lot about fast mana, and it had a lot of mana sinks in the unearth. So the body was not relevant on Sentinel Stalwart, but its mana producing ability was top notch. Checking back in with our friend Gene, I think Gene is going to land somewhere in the middle of these. It has qualities of both. It being a 1/2 and an artifact are each things that matter in this set. And also its splash ability is by far the easiest of the three. You can tap any permanent, including your lands, to produce a mana of any color. And splashing itself is very unique in this format. The colors don't get the ability to splash outside of green almost at all. So I'll go more in depth on Gene later, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork of like the different aspects of each of these cards that were good, to kind of get a sense of where Gene lands and what makes these cards and decks unique and valuable and powerful. Before I get started on that though, I want to talk about green mana dorks, especially these ones in relation to your mana base. I want to be extremely clear, extremely clear. No fewer than 9 green sources if you're playing these guys. If I'm putting Llanowar Elves, Sentinel Stalwart, Jaspera Sentinel, Gene Pollinator in my deck, I am planning to consistently be able to cast them on turn 1, maybe on turn 2, if I'm like if I have to play a tap land. No fewer than 9 green sources. No fewer than 9 green sources. Ideally, you want 10 green sources, especially if you have multiples. That's going to have ramifications on the rest of your deck, how you build your deck around these cards. If green is not your primary color, let's say you are a white-green deck and most of your cheap cards are white, it's looking like you're going to play 9-8 but 9 planes, you should not be interested in Gene. You want these cards for their ability to splash and for their ability to accelerate your mana early. And if you're not playing these cards early, they're not good. So I said that this has ramifications across the rest of your deck building. If you have to have 9 green sources, that reduces the number of lands that you can play of other colors. So Gene does fix you for splashing multiple colors, but you do really want to be careful about non-green double-pipped cards and the density of off-color cards, non-green cards, especially cheap. So you want to be able to double spell early. That's kind of the point of these 1-mana dorks, is they let you start double spelling on like turn 2, even if you have a 1-drop, or turn 3. You want the lower portion of your curve to be very mono green. So you might have heard stories about people cutting lands for these cards in past formats. Sentinel Stalwart, like I said, the body was pretty irrelevant. It was mostly a mana acceleration card. So I was cutting lands very aggressively in Brothers War when I had a Stalwart deck. Part of that was because so many of the colorless artifacts I were playing were cantrips, something like Ichor Wellspring or Energy Refractor. When you have cantrips, you see more of your deck, so you generally want to play fewer lands. Let's say I had 2 Sentinel Stalwarts. I'd probably play 15 or 16 lands, depending on my curve. I saw a couple decks that were playing 13 to 14 lands if you had like 4 Sentinel Stalwarts, which is kind of crazy, but they do fix your mana. So while you do want 9 sources of your main color, you can get away with cheating your other colors, like treating Stalwarts as rainbow mana sources, as long as you have enough cheap stuff to tap to them and you have enough green sources to cast them on turn 1. Also in Brothers War, you were cutting lands aggressively because your mana sinks were usually cheap unearth costs that weren't like costing like 6-7 mana. So you had stuff to do in smaller increments of mana. So it wasn't a big deal if you were missing like your 6 land drop. Jaspera Sentinel, I would cut lands if I had a couple of them, but Kaldheim was a pretty mana hungry format. One of the hallmark green cards in that format was Ravenous Lindworm, which is like the 6-drop that gains life when it enters. It's a 6-drop, so you want to hit your 6 land with these. You had mana sinks in your mana base with those utility lands. Kaldheim decks were very mana hungry. I generally wasn't cutting lands for Jaspera Sentinels unless I had a bunch. Gene, I think, is going to land on the side of Jaspera Sentinel, meaning I don't really want to cut lands for Genes unless I have them in multiples. I have been playing 16 with 2 Genes and maybe 1 or 2 Sammy's Curiosity, which is a common sorcery, 1 mana, gain 2 life, create a lander. Like if I have a couple things that sort of fix my mana, I'll go down to 16. I don't think I've played 15 lands yet in this format, just because, as I'll get into later, the lander tokens and just the way the set is structured means it has, in my opinion, quite a few ways to put your mana and reasons to want to hit your land drops. So in general, I think Gene is closer to Jaspera Sentinel. The body's good, obviously not as good as Jaspera Sentinel, because I think the artifact type line isn't super relevant and it doesn't have reach. But 1-2 is really nice. And I think that is an important part of the card. I do want to mention that Gene's mana producing ability is kind of insane. It's like multiple orders of magnitude better than Jaspera Sentinel or Sentinel Stalwart. So you can tap any permanent. That includes lands. So I had a deck where I was splashing the blue-green signpost, and I played Gene on turn 1. I had only forest. I played my forest, and I could just cast Biomech and Engineer on turn 2 because you can filter your land mana through Gene. You can also tap. There's a number of like aura-based removal spells, Cryo Shatter in blue and Melt Strider's Resolve in green, uncommon, that you can tap to Gene. You can tap like a Banishing Light. You're usually tapping stuff like Lander tokens or maybe another creature, but this comes up a lot and it just turns Gene into like better Birds of Paradise when you just have one of these on the battlefield. So yeah, very impressive mana ability. So now that I've painted a picture of who Gene is, we're going to move on to talking about what we're actually doing with him. And before I get into just a whole like laundry list of cards that work well with him and tips on building your Gene decks, I want to talk a little bit about how this format is playing out, because I was pretty busy this week. I'm recording Wednesday night, which is literally the last possible chance I have to record if I want to release the episode on time on Thursday. I wrote up a bunch of notes on what I think the Gene decks are going to look like over the weekend before I'd actually played with the set with the general population. And I was mostly framing Gene decks as blue-green. And I think blue-green is a really good spot for it. Blue-green is a very good home for these Gene Pollinator, Mana Acceleration, kind of rampy, splashy decks. This format looks like it's more about playing to the board early than the past couple of sets have. And I bring this up not because I think this means the mean Gene blue-green ramp decks are worse because you might get run over, but more that I'm starting to see this more as a way to play proactive Naya strategies. And I think blue-green can be very proactive as well, but I wrote up like a full page of notes, which is still valuable. I still have a lot of good information in there. But now that I've played a little bit more with the set, I'm more interested in using Gene as a creature and as a way to kind of vomit my hand with a bunch of creatures proactively in green, because I think green has good proactive creatures, and especially paired with white. I've been surprisingly impressed with green-white. So I'm going to get into some play patterns, some deck building tips, but I just want to frame it as I initially wrote all this stuff with like blue-green is the main plan in mind, and I think that is different. I think there is definitely something going on in the Naya beatdown space with this mana acceleration. And I actually had a section in my notes about this, but it was a smaller section. But I think that is a pretty good place to be in the format and something that I'm really looking forward to exploring. And I have like a plan on how I'm going to explore and what type of cards I'm interested in. So the big deck building tip I have for Gene decks is you want your opening sequences to be kind of insane. Like you want stuff where you have Gene on 1, turn 2 you play a 2-drop and fit a 1-drop in there, or you just play a 2-drop, and then turn 3 you're playing like 2-drop crack a lander, or 3-drop play a 1-drop, something like that. You want to be able to vomit out a bunch of your hand and leverage that early board presence either to push damage or deter your opponent from pushing damage or converting that board presence into some other resource. What that needs is cheap cards. You need cheap cards in your Gene decks. It's basically just a vanilla 1-2 until you have other things on the board to accelerate with it. You need these cheap curves that sort of fit like puzzle pieces together. It was so satisfying in Brothers War to do this with all the cantripping artifacts. There's a bunch of that stuff in this set with like Lander tokens or Cryogen Relic, which I'll get to. I need to stress, just like I stressed, play 9 green sources. Please put cheap cards in your Gene decks for him to perform well. Some cards that I really like paired with Gene. Number 1, Galactic Wayfarer. This is a common in green, 2 and a green, 3/3. When it enters, make a Lander token. For my money, this is the best common in the set. It's just a 2-for-1. It's a 3/3 that comes with a rampant growth. It's not quite as cheap as I would like to support my Gene decks. Like, you really want 2-drops and 1-drops. This card makes a rectangle for your Gene decks. It's perfect. I'm taking it like it's the best common in the set, and I really see it shaking out close to that. I want to talk about Sammy's Curiosity a little bit. I've been playing this kind of like as a one-of in my green decks alongside Gene. I think it kind of begets different decks. So Gene is a deck that really wants to play to the board early. You want stuff to tap to it. I think there's a really powerful play pattern with Sammy's Curiosity where you play that on 1, crack it on 2, untap and play a 4-drop. That's not really the same thing you want to be doing in your Gene decks, but this creates a rectangle for you to tap to Gene. So it definitely works alongside it. Your mana can support it early because you're playing so many green sources. Once I have this, I'll start trimming lands. Though I do want to say a very important note about landers. If you're missing your land drops, the lander tokens do give you additional lands, but they're really bad to crack, like, just to hit your land drop, because then you're basically just playing 2 mana to find a land, a tapped land at that. So you don't want to go too crazy about cutting lands for this card, but it's a card that I will use to fill out the early portions of my curve, and the lander tokens have other applications too. A couple cheap green cards at uncommon that I really like. One is Edge Rover, which is single green, 2/2 reach artifact. When it dies, each player makes a lander. The other is Eumidian Terrabotanist, which is a uncommon 1G 2/3. Whenever land enters, gain a life. Both really strong, cheap things to play. They're pretty proactive. Really like those. You can fill out the early portions of your curve, which is just kind of like some other random green things or a couple of the off-color things that I'll talk about in a sec. Biomechan Engineer. This is the blue-green signpost. It is green-blue, 2/2. When this enters, make a lander token. 8 mana, draw 2 cards, create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. I think this is the best signpost in the set by a decent margin. What it gives you, a 2 mana 2/2 plus a lander, is comparable to Thraben Inspector. You're getting a decent body and a rectangle for a very cheap mana cost. The activation really comes up in your green decks when you end up with a lot of mana. You can kind of grind your opponent out with that. I think this card is incredible. Absolutely perfect in the Gene decks. I'm treating it like a mono green card. Like I said, I had a game where I just played Gene on 1. I had all forests. I had no problem casting it on 2. Just take this anytime you're in green and can reasonably splash. It's going to be great. Some blue commons I like to support Gene decks. One is Cryogen Relic. We got real Brothers War vibes here. It's an artifact, 1 blue. When it enters or leaves, draw a card, and you can sack it to put a stun counter on something tapped. Perfect to tap to Gene. When you vomit your hand, often you're going to need a little bit of card advantage to recoup. This doesn't really play to the board like I was saying, but I still think it's a fantastic enabler and combos really well with the card I'll talk about in a sec. Another cheap blue card I like is Cryo Shatter. Single blue aura. Enchanted creature gets -5/-0, and when it becomes tapped or dealt damage, destroy it. Pretty wide range on this type of card, but this one being 1 mana and just the creature like dies at a stiff breeze is really nice. So like I said before, you can tap this to your Gene Pollinator. Really good enabler and interaction combo card. Really like it. I do want to say, I've mentioned a couple trinkets. I want to reiterate that board presence is better than the trinkets. One of the reasons is because I think your green decks that have a bunch of cheap creatures in them want to leverage spacecraft. Specifically at the top end of the curve, Pinnacle Killship, which is the common 7 mana spacecraft. When it enters, it deals 10 to up to 1 creature. And at 7+, it's a 7/7 flyer. This evens out to be a 2-for-1 in the long run. It's expensive, but it's a good place to put your mana. It's like a giant removal spell. And then often if you have vomited your hand like you should be doing in the Gene decks, it turns into a 7/7 pretty early, and a 7/7 kills really quick. So I really like Cryogen Relics still, but I'm starting to err much more strongly on the side of I want to play a bunch of cheap creatures with utility in these decks rather than a bunch of trinkety artifacts like in Brothers War. One other card that I want to shout out that works with all of the cheap stuff is Gigastorm Titan. This is an uncommon in blue. It is 5 mana 4/4 but it casts 3 less to cast if you've cast another spell this turn. Gene is a fantastic double spell enabler, and Titan is really good payoff for that you can get down really early. A couple of random synergies that you can get with Gene. Specifically, I'm talking about utilizing his tap ability. Siege Ship Agrarian. 3 and a green, 3/3, uncommon. When it becomes tapped, create a lander token, and it has landfall, put a 1/1 counter on it. You get the lander immediately if you have an untapped Gene Pollinator. Fantastic card I found early on. Works really well in these decks, obviously. A couple other things with tap triggers. Nanoform Sentinel is a common in blue, 2 and a blue, 3/2. When it becomes tapped, you can untap another permanent. Happens only once each turn, but if you tap this to Gene, you can untap Gene, tap it for more mana, or use it as like a trick to untap something. You can untap your lands. Yeah, good combo. Mechan Navigator is a blue uncommon. It's 2 mana, 2/1. When it becomes tapped, draw a card, discard a card. All of this stuff you can do with Spacecraft too, but I'm just mentioning that they work with Gene Pollinator. And on top of it, the more obvious application would be kind of the white-red seeded stuff that works with Spacecraft, so cares about if you have tapped creatures at the end of your turn. So the red-white signpost, Sammy, Ship's Engineer, which is a 4 mana 2/4. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, create a tapped 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. There's also an uncommon in red that I really like in these decks, Vault Guard Trooper. It's a 5 mana 5/5, and end step, if you have 2 more tapped creatures, you can discard your hand to draw 2. Like I said, kind of the idea with this is that you vomit out your hand, and this is a great way to refill, especially because you can tap your board at will with Gene Pollinator and get this out ahead of schedule as well. A couple other cards I have liked so far in these decks. One is Selfcraft Mechan. This is a common 4 mana 3/4 in blue. When it enters, you can sacrifice an artifact. When you do, put a 1/1 counter on target creature and draw a card. If you're playing Cryogen Relics, this is amazing. You can sack your Gene Pollinator if you don't need your mana and would rather have a counter and a card somewhere. I've done that before. It's really good. As long as you have a bunch of things that make artifacts. Like I kind of thought this was going to be like a Grixis card going into the format because those are kind of the artifact colors. But I've actually found that, oh, by the way, I think this card is really strong. Selfcraft Mechan. I think it's one of the top blue commons. And I've found that it actually works best in blue-green because you're more willing to sacrifice your lander tokens to enable this. Just curving Galactic Wayfarer into this is a hell of a curve. And one that I've done quite a bit so far. One card that doesn't work with Gene, though you can tap it for mana, but works like in these decks when you have like lander tokens. And I just want to mention it because it's been really impressive so far. Use Social Engineering. This is an uncommon in green. It's a 5 mana enchantment. It's like the racetrack from the last set. Whenever land enters, you make a 2/2 robot, but you can warp it for 2 mana. And that makes a hell of a difference on this card. So you don't need to wait until turn 6 to actually get a trigger out of this. The play pattern that I've really been enjoying is turn 3 Galactic Wayfarer, make a lander. Turn 4 warp this, play my land, crack my lander, and I've basically just paid 2 mana to get 4/4 worth of stats. This just like makes rectangles, gets you on board, uses your landers, is like a late game mana sink too. I think just works perfectly in these kind of green landfall play to the board early decks. One white card that has impressed me is Sunstar Lightsmith. This is an uncommon. It's a 4 mana 3/3. When you cast your second spell each turn, put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. This card's like looked really strong, played out really strong, and I think also because these Gene decks are just vomiting out your hand, you're going to be double spelling. You're very good at double spelling if you've built your deck right. I think this is a really good card for these decks as well. And like I said, I wrote these notes. I put a bunch of blue cards in there, and then when I was actually playing the set, I was kind of like, you know, these red and white cards actually go really well with it. So this is one of the cards that I was like, oh, you know, this actually goes really well in the Gene deck. So I'm trending more towards Gene as an enabler for these white decks. I think the blue-white double spell stuff is really strong, and I think you can splash a lot of it in your Gene Pollinator decks. So like the blue-white Signpost Station Monitor, which is a 2 mana 2/2. When you cast your second spell each turn, make a 1/1 flyer. Another callback to one of my favorite cards of all time, Clarion Spirit. I think this would be a really good splash in a Gene deck as well. So one thing I haven't mentioned this whole episode is talking about splashing and what sorts of things you're going to splash. And while these Gene decks do have a lot of ability to splash, I've actually found that my splashes have been fairly conservative. Like, I haven't been playing really ambitious piles. Obviously, you can splash like good bombs you opened. I just opened the Mutinous Massacre, the Black-Red Wrath that just like wins the game. It's like the odd or even one. And I double splashed that in a Gene deck, just with 2 swamps in my red-green deck. But below rare, I do find that blue has like Cryo Shatter at common, which is a really good removal spell, and green gets 3 good interaction spells also below rare. So like interaction is something that I would splash often in a green deck. I haven't found like I needed to in a ton of decks. Now, obviously you can. I think splashing in these decks is a great way to fill in the holes in things that you might not have. So stuff like top end, interaction, card advantage. Like one card advantage spell I would love to splash would be Cerebral Download, which is the 5 mana draw 3 and it surveils based on number of artifacts you have. Like if you're light on card advantage in one of these decks, that's a great splash. So the default for me so far isn't to get super splashy with this. I know that's a big part of the card, but it's more like you have the ability to, if you see a good rare or if you feel like your deck's lacking interaction, card advantage, or top end. One last thing before I wrap up. I've spent the past half hour or so extolling the virtues of Gene. I don't think it's a crazy high pick. If I had to slap a letter grade on him, I would give him a C+. It's kind of its own thing. I'm not really being proactive about picking them up. It's more if I'm already in green, looking like I'm going to be heavy green, then I'll start prioritizing them. I'm really not trying to take Gene as my first green card. So that's going to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed me rambling about cards that work with my man Gene for the past half hour. I hope you found the little retrospective on Kaldheim and Brothers War interesting. Those are 2 of my favorite formats of all time. Kaldheim's probably my GOAT. Brothers War, one of my GOATs. Anyway, if you want to reach out to me, show me your sick Gene decks. You can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. You can find me on Discord at samp6. You can find me on Twitch streaming very occasionally at samp_mtg. Thanks for listening. See you next week. All right, second straight week with a post-credits thingy. Mark Anderson of Limited Level Up Set Review co-host fame has pinged me multiple times this week wanting to talk about the card Requiem Monolith, which is a card that I love. I mentioned it on my cube breakdown last week in the post-credits scene. This is like the 3-mana artifact in black that's kind of like a Phyrexian Arena, but with a whole lot of extra text. Mark watches a lot of early access VODs the weekend before the set comes out, and he was talking in the Limited Level Ups Discord about how he just constantly saw players and their opponents misplaying with the Monolith. And in the Discord, he made a thread where he analyzed one of the games of Alex's, of Cortical's, on his stream today, talking about all the mistakes that Alex and his opponent made in the game where they both had a Monolith in play. So he was pinging me saying you should shout this out because this card does a lot more than it looks like. There's a lot of lines where you can like ping your opponent's creature and then that creature basically can't block if they're at too low life total, or you ping your own creature and swing in. I'm going to link some screenshots of the thread that Mark posted in the episode description because he's really excited about this card and it is really sweet, and he thinks people aren't playing it to the full potential, and they definitely aren't. So yeah, check that out. See ya.